Have you ever been treated like you don't belong just because of your skin color? This story will make you want to scream at the injustice. The afternoon sun cast warm golden light over the neighborhood park. Laughter echoed from the playground, children racing around, carefree, enjoying the last hours before dinner. But then Karen Voss appeared, her sharp eyes locked onto something that in her mind didn't belong. A young black boy, no more than 7 years old, swinging his legs on the park bench, smiling as he watched the other kids play. Karen's face twisted in disgust. She marched straight over, heels clicking against the pavement, and planted herself in front of him. "Who are you?" she snapped. "I've never seen you here before." The boy blinked up at her, startled. I'm just visiting my grandpa," he said politely. Karen narrowed her eyes. "Your grandpa?" she repeated, voice dripping with doubt. She glanced. Around, no parents, no adult in sight. "You don't live here," she said flatly. "This is a private neighborhood. You can't just show up and use our park." The boy's smile faded. His small fingers gripped the edge of the bench. I'm not doing anything wrong," he murmured. Karen snorted. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "I know what you kids do, running around where you don't belong, causing trouble." The boy's eyes widened. "I'm just waiting for my grandpa," he said again, his voice a little quieter now. Karen leaned closer, lowering her voice into a whisper only he could hear. "If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." The boy froze. Karen saw the fear in his eyes, and she liked it. She grabbed his arm, her fingers tight around his small wrist. "Come on," she said, pulling him up from the bench. "You're not supposed to be here." Karen tightened her grip on the boy's wrist, dragging him toward the sidewalk. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "Go back where you came from." The boy's eyes welled with tears, but before he could say another word, a deep voice cut through. "The air! Let him go!" Karen froze. Footsteps approached from behind, slow but firm. She turned, already prepared to explain herself, to put this troublemaker in his place. But the moment she saw who it was, her stomach dropped. Richard Carter, the president of the HOA, the man she spent years trying to impress. The one she always sucked up to at every HOA meeting, hoping to get special privileges. She plastered on a fake smile. "Mr. Carter," she said sweetly, letting go of the boy's wrist immediately. "I was just—" But Richard wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on the child, and in an instant his entire face changed. "Chase, my boy," he said, his voice suddenly soft. "Are you okay?" The little boy sniffled and ran straight into Richard's arms. "Grandpa," he murmured. Karen's smile shattered. Her throat went dry. "Grandpa." The realization hit her like a freight train. This child, the one she had just threatened, grabbed, and humiliated, was Richard Carter's grandson. Her heart pounded. This couldn't be happening. She had just attacked the heir of the most powerful man in the entire neighborhood. Karen stumbled back, stammering. I didn't know," she blurted out. "I thought he was—" Richard finally looked at her, and for the first time, Karen saw something she had never seen before in his eyes. Rage. And she knew. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Karen's fake smile wavered as Richard Carter's piercing gaze locked onto her, his usual warm and composed demeanor gone. His eyes were cold, unforgiving. "What?" he said, voice steady but sharp. "Did you just do to my grandson?" Karen laughed, nervously waving a hand. "Oh, Mr. Carter, I was just looking out for the neighborhood. You know, keeping an eye on unfamiliar faces." Richard's expression didn't change. "You mean," he said slowly, "you assumed Chase didn't belong here?" Karen's stomach twisted. "No, I was just protecting our community," she insisted. "We have rules about outsiders wandering around." Richard exhaled, looking away for a brief second. Then, He pulled out his phone. Karen's chest tightened. He dialed a number and all he said was, "Call an emergency HOA meeting. Right now." Karen's blood ran cold. The entire neighborhood knew how much power Richard had. One word from him, and people listened. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was a reckoning. 10 minutes later, Karen sat in the middle of the HOA's biggest emergency meeting in years, and every single seat was filled. Her name was about to be dragged through the mud, and for the first time, she had no way out. Karen sat in the center of the room, her heart hammering as the HOA board members filed in. Every seat in the meeting hall was filled. Some people even stood in the back whispering, throwing glances of disgust in her direction. But the worst part? Richard Carter sat at the head of the table, completely silent, and in front of him a tablet. Karen swallowed hard. Something was coming. Then Richard stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't give a long speech. He just turned the tablet around and pressed play. The screen lit up with clear security footage from the park. Karen's own voice rang out in the silent room. "Who are you? You don't belong here. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. You're not supposed to be here." Then, the final blow, footage of her yanking Chase's wrist, trying to drag him away. Gasps filled the room. Karen's face turned ghost white. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. There was no excuse. No way to spin this. She was caught. Then, one by one, people started standing up. A woman from the back. "She tried to fine me for having my black family over for a barbecue." A young Latino man. "She told me my decorations weren't appropriate for the neighborhood." A mother. "She said my biracial son should go play somewhere else." Karen shook her head frantically. "That's not true. I was just enforcing rules." Richard raised a hand, and the room fell silent. Then he spoke, just one sentence. "You don't represent this community. You don't have a place here anymore." Karen's legs nearly gave out. She had spent years controlling Whispering Pines, and now, in a single moment, she was erased. The HOA vote was called unanimous. Karen Voss was officially removed from the neighborhood board, and her power gone forever. Karen Voss had spent years ruling over Whispering Pines, treating the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. Now, she was a ghost. No one spoke to her. Neighbors who once smiled and waved now turned their backs. Conversations stopped when she walked by. The friendly community she once controlled had become a prison of silence, but that was only the beginning, because outside of Whispering Pines, Karen was going viral. HOA president caught harassing a child. You won't believe what happens next. Karen tries to kick out HOA president's grandson, gets destroyed. Cancel Karen trends nationwide. The video of her grabbing Chase had spread like wildfire, millions of views, thousands of angry comments, and the worst part? Her face was everywhere. People recognized her at the grocery store, in town. Even strangers sneered when she walked past. Her name became a joke. Then came the final blow. Her landlord called. "We're not renewing your lease," he said. "We don't want problems." Karen tried to fight it. "This is illegal. I have rights." But the truth? No one wanted her here anymore. With no choice left, she listed her house for sale. Weeks later, on her final day in Whispering Pines, she stood at her window, watching the community she had once controlled move on without her. And then she saw him Chase, the same little boy she had tried to erase, but this time he wasn't alone. He was laughing, playing with friends in the same park she tried to ban him from. Karen stared, frozen. Then Chase turned. For a brief moment, their eyes met. But there was no fear in his face, no anger, just a small, knowing smile. Karen's chest tightened. She had lost everything, and Chase, he had won. Karen Voss had spent years controlling Whispering Pines. Now, she was just another outsider. Her car was packed to the brim, the trunk barely able to close. Her face was tight, her hands gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. She wasn't angry anymore. She was defeated. No amount of HOA meetings, no amount of fake authority could erase what had happened. She had become the villain of her own story. And now, she had to live with that. She started the engine, but just before she pulled away, she glanced one last time in her rearview mirror. And what she saw, it stung. The neighborhood she once ruled over, completely untouched by her absence. People were smiling, talking, living their lives like she had never even existed. And then, right in the center of it all, Chase, the same little boy she had tried to erase. But this time, he wasn't scared, he wasn't alone. He was laughing, playing in the park, the very place she had tried to ban him from, and beside him, standing tall, was Richard Carter. The old man placed a gentle hand on his grandson's shoulder. "See, Chase," he said quietly, "the truth always wins." Chase looked up at his grandfather, his eyes bright with understanding. He nodded. Karen watched, her chest tightening. She had tried to erase him. And yet, in the end, she was the one erased. With one last, bitter exhale, she pressed the gas pedal and disappeared down the road.